As a developer, it's important that you understand how to work with Azure, Microsoft's cloud platform. However, a common thing I hear is that the cloud is just too expensive. Either you can't spend the money necessary to learn it, or your boss thinks it's too expensive to move your services to. Well, in this video, I'm going to show you 5 ways you can save money in Azure. That way, you can have the confidence to move your career or your business forward. This video is sponsored by my Getting Started with Azure course. I created this course to empower users to take full advantage of the cloud with confidence. A major focus of the course is on taking away the confusion and uncertainty of Azure. That includes a heavy focus on managing costs effectively. For instance, if I had paid for every demo I performed in the course, my total bill would have been less than $5. We set up 14 services over the course of about 13 hours of content, and for each, we discuss how much it will cost, how to minimize that cost, and what the best way is to optimize our expenditures. So if you're looking to get up to speed in Azure in a way that leaves you ready to start using it in the real world, check out the link below. Now, let's get started by viewing my portal. You may have seen this portal already if you've been watching the Timco Retail Manager series, because we've deployed to Azure, and here in fact are our Azure services we've deployed so far. So this is not only my place for doing the Timco series, but it's also a place where I host my own services and build up new services. So there's a lot going on in this Azure instance, and I thought it'd be a great opportunity to kind of take you through some of the steps that I do when I'm thinking about how to make the most efficient use of my money. Now, just so you know, I get about $150 a month because I am a Microsoft MVP. So that money is applied to this account, and if you look here, you'll see that I have about 53 cents left in credit. So I'm getting pretty close to the end of my credit, and in fact, I will go over my credit amount. And I have been for the past few months. And that's because I've been doing my own thing as well as doing demos pretty heavily in Azure. So that's okay, but I really want to keep an eye on that because I am spending my own money once I hit that credit limit. I'm spending my own money to go over that. So I don't want to just let services run wild if I don't need to. So let's see how I tweak and hone these services. And the first way comes when you go to create a new service. There's lots of things you can do if you go create resource. There's lots of options here. These are the popular ones, but then you've got so many more underneath all of these other options. So what do I do before I even start? Well, I go to the Azure Pricing Calculator. Now, if you go to Azure Pricing Calculator in your search, just search for it, you'll see here azure.microsoft.com/en-us/pricing/calculator, or just Google or Bing the Azure Pricing Calculator and you're good to go. So let's go here and look at how to use this. This is an incredible tool for helping you save money. That's especially true if you are making decisions about which service to use. One of the things I hear a lot is, well, I'm going to put a virtual machine in Azure and then use that for my website. Well, if you did that, I'd recommend you click on virtual machines here, and it's going to create a calculator down below. It's going to pop that up in just a minute. There we go. And now you can do your calculations to find out how much it will cost. Now, by default, they set some things up for you. So for example, it says I'm in region West US. Well, I'm actually in Central US. This may change the costs a little bit, depending on where your region is. Now notice up here, it says in the upper right-hand corner, it says monthly is expected to be $154.08. That seems rather high to me. So you can come in here and make some tweaks. It's a Windows operating system only. Well, what if you want SQL Server? Well, now you've changed to $1,249 a month. That seems a little too much. So let's take that to operating system only. Tier is standard, low priority, and basic. And you say, well, you know what? It's not a big deal. It can go low priority. Okay, now we're down to $61 a month. What about basic? Now you're down to $13.19 a month. Okay, and you may say, well, what's the difference? Well, down here it's going to tell you. So for example, instance, I have one core, 0.75 gigabytes of RAM, and 20 gigabytes of temporary storage. It costs me just under 2 pennies an hour, which works out to $13.19 a month. So by doing that, you can say, okay, well, I guess that's gonna work, or you know what, that's just not enough RAM. I need to bump it up to this one. Now we're at $25.60 a month. What this allows you to do is plan before you build, because you can look at this and say, that's just too much money. And then you know before you start. Don't start something and then figure out how much it's gonna cost, because the calculator will tell you how much it will cost, or at least estimate for those things that are based upon usage. So with this, what it's saying is we've got a basic operating system only Windows installation of a virtual machine with 1.75 gigabytes of RAM, 40 gigabytes of temporary storage. It's going to have one virtual machine, which is going to run for 730 hours, also known as 1 month. You can change that to months and see 1 month there. But that way you can say, well, I'm going to only run it for half the month and show how it'd look. As far as license, operating system license is included. And it says pay as you go. So what that's going to do is it's going to provide you with a Windows license to run a virtual machine in the cloud. Just because you're running Azure doesn't mean you're exempt from paying for licensing. That's why the SQL Server was so expensive, because you're paying for a SQL Server license. Now, if you have a license you can put on there with the Azure Hybrid benefit, you might do that. Now, there's also managed disks. You can add different type of hard drives. For example, a standard hard drive, which is a spinning platter, or a standard solid state drive, which is much faster. And you can say, well, I want one disk, 4 gigabytes. No, I want something more like 256 gigabytes. Well, it's going to cost you $19.20 a month, but you've got a solid state hard drive to work with. Storage transactions, you're going to do 100 transaction units, which is 10,000 transaction units times $0.002 an hour. That's going to be hard to estimate. I understand that, because you don't necessarily know what the transaction units are or how many you're going to do based upon your usage. What I would do is use the defaults at first, but then do some research. There is, up at the top here, there is this information bubble right next to the name of what you're doing. Click on that. You can go to documentation and product details, as well as pricing details. That will break, those 3 areas right there will break down all the information you need about this specific thing. That way you can learn more about why you're paying so much. Now let's just say, for instance, that you were thinking to do a SQL Server installation. You're gonna run SQL Server on a virtual machine in the cloud. And you look at that bill and say, even for a basic, I am paying, which is way underpowered for SQL Server. Don't do that. You really wanna have a standard, and you want way more than that. You probably want, let's go with an A4, 8 cores, 14 gigabytes of RAM at the very least. So you're talking about $2,700 a month. And you look at that and say, that's outrageous. We can never afford to have SQL Server in the cloud. This is why I say that coming to the pricing calculator can help you make decisions about how you're going to work with your Azure account, what you're going to do and not do. If you say, you know what, that's way too much, we're not going to do that. And this is why I don't recommend virtual machines for most instances, because you're not getting any of the benefits of Azure except a hosting platform for a virtual machine. That's about it. There's lots more benefits to Azure, and the course goes way more into detail with that kind of stuff. But let's just say that we wanted to have SQL Server in the cloud. And we said our first thought was a virtual machine with SQL Server on it. We say, nope, that's not going to happen. $2,700 is way too much. I'll come back up here and see what your other options are. How about an Azure Sql Database? Okay, well, it's a little cheaper. It's $1,476.43, which that's still very expensive. It's way too expensive for most people. Now, businesses, that might be the right choice. But you come over here and play the pricing. Well, let's go to Central US first, single database or elastic pool. We covered that in the course, but this is a really cool option if you are a business. But for a single database, this is fine. Backup storage is fine. Purchase model, DTU or virtual core. Right now we're on virtual core. Again, this information here will talk more about those details. But let's just say that you knew that DTU can be a cheaper option, which it can be. Let's choose that one. Did you see that pricing jump? That is not a pricing mistake. A SQL Server database in the cloud can cost you as little as $4.90 a month. So when you look at that virtual machine, $2,100, whatever it was, $2,700 a month for maybe with a demo database or something small, you might get discouraged. But if you play around, you find out, oh, I can get a pretty cheap option here for $4.90. Now, is this going to be the slamming SQL Server that can host 100,000 people? No, it won't be. But if you didn't notice down here, we have 5 DTUs because we've got the basic server plan. Well, if you bump that up to standard, well, now we're at $14.72, but now we have 10 DTUs. What if you wanted 20? Now a DTU, if you're not familiar, well, again, this link will tell you more about that, but it's a data transmission unit calculation based upon the usage of the CPU, the RAM, and I believe the transmission across the wire. It's an amalgamation of those 3 numbers. So it's not something you can easily calculate. It's based upon how much load you're going to have on your database. Well, what it's going to do is basically slow down your database if you have too many people trying to hit it. But you can always scale up a service as you need it. But to start off with, even at this standard rate, you're talking about less than $15 a month. And then we want to bump it up. Well, now it's $30 a month, but you've doubled your DTUs. And just so you know, this is kind of a side note, but the Azure SQL databases can replicate from your local database on your local network. So I've done that where you make the Azure SQL database your backup database or your fallback database, and then you switch over and make it the primary database and your local database be the fallback database. So there's a lot of cool stuff you can do starting at $4.90 a month. So just using this calculator, you can play around with it and say, you know what? Let's compare this to MySQL. So you search for Azure database for MySQL. Notice it put it down below here. You say, okay, $138 a month, but you know not to be too freaked out yet because you can look at, well, are there other options? Basic, that sounds great, $60 a month. Well, a little expensive still. How about $35 a month? That's about the cheapest you can go with Azure database for MySQL. About $35 a month. That includes 5 gigabytes of storage. So an additional backup storage, we've got 100 gigabytes. We could make that down to 10. We're down to $26. Oh, no, $26 for monthly costs. Oh, don't ignore this one. This is the cumulative of both. I often get those two mixed up. But if you look at the top here for a specific one, or at the bottom of that one, it will tell you the monthly cost, which we've gotten down to $26.32. So not as cheap as a SQL database, which makes sense. I mean, Microsoft owns SQL. They do not own MySQL. They've optimized SQL and so on. So there's a very, very cheap version for a SQL database. But by playing around in here, you have been able to figure out what's your lowest cost going forward. Even if you are locked into Microsoft SQL, you now know what your options are, a virtual machine or different levels of Azure SQL Database and what those costs are. So the pricing calculator is your friend. Now, when you're done, you can just either save it or you can start deleting all or delete specific ones. Let's delete all. And now your calculator's clean again. You can start over with different things. For example, Azure Functions or whatever you want to test out. So tip number 1, use this pricing calculator. It may seem simple, but it really does save you hundreds of dollars potentially a month just by making the right choice. All right, let's go back to the portal. And if you haven't noticed, I'm using Microsoft Edge, which is actually Chromium based. And one of the nice new features is this vertical tab. I love it. And you can pin these, but I like to have them collapsed just to have more screen real estate. So let's go back to our Azure portal. And this next one is one that people often overlook. When you create a resource, let's just create, I don't know, a SQL database. Cool. We're not actually gonna create it, but I wanna show you, by the way, here's a quick side. This is a bonus tip number 1. When you go to create something, make sure you look at the pricing down here. Configure database. You go back to standard and premium. Now you're at $5 a month. Okay, so $4.99. They said $4.90 in the calculator. $4.99 here. I'm not sure what the difference is, but there is a slight discrepancy. So there you go. So we configured it now for $4.99, less than $5. So, but the next tip is about your resource group. Notice this resource group right here. This is important that you take advantage of it. Now, a resource group is free. There's no charge for a resource group. All it's doing is grouping your services and things together. So you can create as many as you want. I have one called Delete Me. It's probably for my demo. But when you create a resource group, you can name things and connect things together. So let's look at, I'm going to create this. Let's go back to the search and just search for resource groups. And in resource groups, you'll see all of my resource groups. Let's just pick one. And what we're going to do, I think I'll choose this one, First Storage Resource Group. I want to show you something else. Bonus tip number 2 is coming up. So this resource group, here's all the resources inside of it. What this does, it keeps all your connected things in one group. But there's more to it than that, because you can also, when you're done working with it, you can delete the resource group. Now, what this will do is it will not only delete the resource group, but it will also delete all the resources in the resource group, which is a big deal. You don't want to do that accidentally. But what that allows you to do is, let's just say you want to test something out. Well, create a new resource group, maybe called Delete Me. And then you test all the things out you want to in that resource group. When you're done, you go to the resource group. Let me just even look. There's nothing in here. You delete the resource group. So you have to type the resource group, which is, or name, Delete Me, and you can delete it. And that will delete the resource group and everything inside of it. Now, there's another benefit of having that resource group. This resource group here is for a friend of mine. He runs a dry cleaner and fur storage site. And one of the things he wanted me to do was find a place to host his website. Now, his website's very, very simple. So I didn't want him to be paying lots of money per month. So I used Azure. You may say, well, Azure's not the cheapest thing to host a website. Well, actually it is. Let's look at his website first. So I've actually got it saved here. So let's go to it. And this website is a very simple website, a little bit of JavaScript and some images and so on. All right, that's all there is to it, single page, not a big deal. Well, why would we pay even $5 a month to host this? So if we look at this resource group, one of the things you can do is go to cost analysis and see how much this resource group is costing me. And I think you'll be surprised. So this is near the end of my month. So this is a perfect time to look at my costs. And as you can see, this chart looks scary. I mean, look at that, those prices just jump right up. Until you look at the actual cost, which is about a penny. So it has cost about 1 cent to host this website for the entire month. That is with SSL, that is with a custom domain name. So if you look, it's secured. It has a custom domain name. This is not an Azure domain name. And yet it's cost me 1 penny to host it. That's because this entire resource group is costing me 1 penny a month. So it comes time to evaluate what should I get rid of, what should I not keep. When I look at this resource group, I don't think let's get rid of it. I think let's ignore it because it's not costing me anything. And in fact, there's actually extra stuff in here. This cheap hosting plan, I don't think it's hosting anything. That's what I moved from. It's actually a free hosting plan, but I haven't deleted it yet. But Azure Key Vault we're using, Azure a storage account, the CDN profile, an endpoint, and also application insights. All of that is running for this one website, and it's costing me about a penny a month. So if you want cheap website hosting, now it's not a C# application, it's just a HTML, CSS, and JavaScript application, but you could host a Blazor WebAssembly app there, but it's costing me a penny a month. So bonus tip number 2 is look into Azure Static Web Apps. I'm gonna cover that on this channel in the future, but Azure Static Web Apps are a great way to save lots of money on really tiny web applications or web applications that don't need the server-side scripting. So if it is just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, even your Angular applications, they can be Azure Static Web Apps with SSL, with a CDN, with, lots of great features. All right, so that was bonus tip number 2, but tip number 2 was to use these resource groups, and then when you're done with a resource group, delete the entire resource group so you make sure you delete all the things associated with it. One of the things that often happens is, like for example, I created this CDN for the first storage. Well, it also created this endpoint. So it created 2 things. Well, if I delete one, I'm not necessarily guaranteed to delete both. But if it's in the same resource group and I delete the resource group, it deletes everything. So even if your service creation create additional things, it's still going to get rid of all of those things. You got to clean up the whole thing and not leave things hanging out there to be cleaned up later, or to sit there and just accumulate cost. So that's tip number 2. Use the resource group to delete everything when you're done. Tip number 3 is about budgeting. So let's look at my subscription. Just type for subscription and find a subscription. In this case, I have just one. Most people do. So in my subscription, I have a cost by resource and a spending rate and forecast. This is a great thing to keep an eye on. This will give you a good overview of what's going on with your Azure account. It's going to tell you just how much you're spending and how close you're going to come to whatever goal you have for spending. For example, my $150 credit, that's that blue line right there. And notice that if we zoom in here, I am going to get beyond that. This month, the forecast is $158.75, which that's $8.75 above my credits. So I'm going to spend less than $10 this month. But I've actually spent a lot more than that in previous months before I went, oops, I missed something. I can review these things and have done the things that I'm talking about right now. So the tip number 3 in your subscription is to look for this budget. And this budget here will allow you to set up a budget. Notice I have a budget called Overflow budget. And my Overflow budget, let's click into it, is I have set up a budget of $250. Now, with Azure, you're either going to be pay as you go, or you're going to have a just use the free credits. So if you have credits, you can say just use those free credits and no more, and turn everything off once you hit the limit. Or basically charge me and continue to charge me until the month is over. I wish there's a middle ground there somewhere where you could say, hey, you know what? I want your limit to be, in this case, $250. Don't spend more than that. But that's not how Azure works. So instead, we can set up this budget. Now, if I spend more than $250, Azure will just keep going. It'll keep spending the money. It's not like this is a stop point like I want. But what it is a set of speed bumps that I can put along the way. So I've said, you know what? The most I should ever spend in a month on Azure is $250. But I don't want to be satisfied with spending that much money. In fact, what I want to do is I want to put some speed bumps along the way so I know when I am hitting certain milestones. So milestone number 1 for me was $150. When you hit that, I want an email, which is 60% of my budget. So email me at my email address and say, hey, you know what? You've hit your budget alert. There is a budget alert at this amount. You've hit this. Because what I can do is look at that very quickly and go, okay, I know I'm going to spend more than $150 a month. But if I get this email and it is 5 days into the month, that's a problem. If I get this email and it's 25 days into not the month, the billing cycle. If it's 25 days into the 30-day billing cycle, then that's not a big deal. But if it's 5 days in, that's a big deal. And so just getting that email allows me to gauge where I'm at without even going to the portal. Now, I was doing some extra things a couple of months ago, and I was doing some work and I went well past this budget amount. And so I've actually hit this next one, which is this 80% threshold for $200 a month. So I got this email. I'll show you the email. This email comes through. It says you have an alert for budget, Overflow budget. Your total spend for it is now $311.14, exceeding your specified threshold of $200. I blew past it. Just note that's the actual value I'm going to be spending. Hey, check it out and maybe, figure that out. So I got this email and it let me know, oop, there is something to evaluate and make sure that I address. Now I did. And of course, that was an email that I knew was coming because I had seen the previous ones come through. But I want to save that and kind of show you what that looks like. So how do you create a budget? Well, under budgets, you just say add. Now let's walk you through the steps here. You give it a name. This is our test budget. And the reset period is monthly. I prefer to see monthly because that's what Azure bills you on. And because also I don't want to wait until the end of the quarter. Let's just say my budget is $150 a month. That'd be $450 a quarter. If I say, well, my budget's $450 and I'm gonna wait until 80% of that's spent to get an email, well, what happens if 5 days into the quarter, I get an email? It's kind of too late to do much about that, right? So I like it the shortest period possible, that monthly cycle, and then I can adjust from there. So creation date we can go through today and expiring date. You can send it way into the future. Now, the budget amount, you say how much you're going to give based upon their threshold amount. Now, that had estimated before it wonked out. I mean, it's, I think, $219, but let's just say my budget is actually more like $200. Okay. And then I can hit next. And I say, okay, what conditions do you want to happen? Well, I want, when it's based upon a forecast of 60%, I want you to do none. You can set up action groups if you want with more smart stuff. You can say none though, and just put in a recipient. Don't double edit. But then from there, you can do forecast amount, or you can say actual amount here and say when you actually hit 60, 80, you can set another one for actual at 50, or actual at 20, whatever you want to do. And then right now it just emails me. But if you want to create instead an action group, you can do that. And then the action group can get a text message, or it can get an email, and so on. So for me, it's just send me an email when it hits these thresholds. This is probably too much, the 20, but it's up to you. Once you're done, and you can actually change the language that comes in, which is kind of nice. And then from there, you just hit create. Once you do that, I'm not going to do that. But once you do that, then you get this. This right here, which is my budget, which you can see based upon the progress of the month, where we're at, and how much I'm spending. So this page gives you a great overview, and this page gives you an idea, this is how much you're going to spend this month. But this budget alert will give you a heads up even when you're not in the portal actively looking at it. So tip number 3 is to use the budget. Set up a budget, set up your speed bumps along the way, so you're making sure that you watch out for it. Don't just set a speed bump at the top of the budget. Because again, if you hit the top of the budget and you are 5 days in, that's a problem. So you want that speed bump to happen a lot earlier. I do it at 60, 80, and 100, but you might want to set yours a little lower than that. I am pretty active in the portal and keeping an eye on my expenses, but you might want to set your first one at 20%, because then you know just how fast you've gone through your budget. And maybe set 1 for expected at your 90% range or something like that, so that once the portal says, oh, nope, I'm expecting you to spend more than 90% of your budget, it sends you an email and lets you know, because that might be on day 1. And if it is, then you can look at that and see how much the expected is and if that's acceptable or not. So lots of different ways you can use this budget to really inform you when there's going to be any kind of surprise. You don't want surprises when it comes to your bill. You don't want to forget that you left on a $10,000 per month service. You want your budget to tell you immediately that there's a problem. And that's where both the estimate and the actual budget alerts can help keep you on top of things without you having to be in the portal. All right, now tip number 4, and we're gonna stay right in our subscription. Again, if you search for subscription, you'll find the subscriptions, and then you can choose the one that you're running under. Should be only one usually. But in here, we're going to look at all the charges we're being charged this month and how to really read that information. This is tip number 4. So go to cost analysis. In cost analysis, there's actually a try preview here. And I want you to use this, because even though this gives you some good information here, and if you wanted to do it this way, this could be fine. Okay, service names, which ones are going to cost you the most this month? Azure App Service is going to cost the most, then SQL Database, and so on. Resource groups. Which one costs me the most? Webhooks. Then the lead magnets group. And notice I can say, okay, I don't really care about the first storage resource group because it's costing a penny. But I do care about looking at webhooks and lead magnet group because those two combined cost me over $100 a month. So you can kind of dial in and see which one you want. But this try preview here, if you select the new cost analysis view and hit close and then reopen the cost management view, you will see that there's an additional option here called cost analysis preview. We were just in cost analysis, but we're gonna look at cost analysis preview, which gives you a different view. And I like this view a lot better. So this shows me the list of, let's see if we can zoom in a little bit here. Zooming into the portals is messy. So no, we cannot. That's the best we can do, sorry. Nope. Shrinking it down does not help. Oh, hey, look at that. We can shrink down these groups and then we can zoom in. Okay, probably a little better to read. Sorry about that. But these resource groups here, it tells you how much the resource group is going to cost you this month or has cost you this month. And it sorts it by most expensive to least expensive. And when you are looking at how to save money, it makes no sense to spend time on things that cost you very little to no money. If you are not looking at the budget and you looked at first storage resource group and you notice how many things were in. Now it's only list 2 right now because that's the only thing that's costing me money in there. But if you look at the actual resource group, you would notice, man, there's a lot of stuff in there that must be expensive. Let's see if we can cut it down. Let's see if we can get rid of that key vault. Well, the key vault costs you nothing. So no, this is why this view, this cost analysis preview, which may become the regular view at some point, but this view right here is so helpful because it orders it and it shows you this webhooks view is costing you $38. But then you can expand it out and look at inside there, what's costing me the most in here. Well, again, that key vault is less than a penny, so not costing me anything. It's when we look at this right here, the webhook app service, that we see $23.58 a month. So this is the most expensive thing in the most expensive resource group. If I can make an adjustment here, that will have the most impact on my bottom line. So let's look at this app service plan. You can actually click on it and go right to it. And one of the nice things about Azure is that for almost every service, you have this option here to scale up or scale out. And scaling up will allow you to actually scale down. So click on scale up. You can see right here that I am currently, notice the blue border around this S1. This is what is currently being used, is the S1 production tier, which is costing me about $43.80 a month. Okay, so if I want to go cheaper, I can look at the other plans and go, those aren't cheaper. Additional plans, those aren't cheaper either. So what do? Well, I can go down to dev and test. And I can look at, well, free is gonna be a lot cheaper, but maybe this one right here at $32 a month. I'm gonna zoom back out a little bit to give you a better view of this. So $32 a month, that's a little better than $43 a month. But notice down here, the things that we get, traffic manager, daily backups 10 times a day, 5 staging slots, up to 10 instances. Whereas with this one right here, we don't get any of those. We get manual scale and that's it. So we're losing a lot there. But you can see additional options and go, oh, well, there's this one, but it's $64 a month. So you can at least look at this and go, okay, it makes sense. I think we're good at this level. It's the cheapest one we can get for what we need. But then you could also look around and look at the S1 for a standard one versus the P1 V2, which is premium one. Notice this is just for comparison's sake. You have to understand what these mean. But 100 total ACU versus 210 ACU, twice as much RAM, and a DV2 series compute equivalent. This is a better system. But notice that it's only less than $10 a month difference. So you could say, well, we were looking at costs and saying, okay, is this the right cost for us? But we could more than double the performance of the web server for $10 a month. And well, normally when you're looking at your budget, you want to cut costs where possible. It sometimes makes sense to look at this and go, hey, you know what? Let's spend a little more. So let's zoom out here a little bit more and look at these features here. And we can select this one and notice we now have 20 instances, 20 slots, 50 times a day backup. So a lot more stuff in this one, and we're spending $10 a day more. So we came into this looking at, can we save money? And he said, well, no, but maybe you could spend a little more. But maybe we were the opposite. Maybe this is what we're on right now. We can say, you know what? We don't need all of this for what we're doing. We could drop down and save $10 a month and not lose anything vital. If that were the case, when we did make that selection, you just hit apply. It would take a little bit, and now you're paying at the new price, which would be $10 a month cheaper if that's the way we're going. But up is the one that's more expensive, or is the one that we'd be going to. So you hit apply now, and that's when it would do the switch over. So this scaling will allow you to look at, can I save some money? When you're done, go back to click this cost management, and you're back to where you were. And you say, okay, there's nothing there I can save money on. How about the SQL Server? Go to this one. This is costing you $7.68 so far. Okay, let's come down here. Actually, for a SQL Server, you have to go into the server itself. So you click on that. Now we can come down in here. Whoops, I was wrong with that, sorry. Go back to your database, and in the database, they move these things around. Unfortunately, it doesn't say scale up, but what it does say is compute plus storage. Click on that, and right now we're paying for the standard workload, which is 10 DTUs for our server. But what if we went back to basic? And basic is now $5 a month instead of the $15 a month. Notice down here where we're seeing the dollar amounts. We could cut this price in a third. So I could look at that and say, hey, you know what? We're not using a lot of these DTUs. Notice the DTUs, I have 10. The DTU percentage is 2% utilization, which means I absolutely could scale back to a basic, which is going to take this down to half the DTUs, would be now the max, because we're down to 5 instead of 10. But that's not a problem, because you can see this chart right here saying I don't need anywhere near that much. Well, now I've saved $10 a month just by hitting apply. Then you can go back to, well, discard those changes. And unfortunately, this did lose us our place. Let's go back to subscriptions, select it, go back to cost analysis. Oops, try preview. Unfortunately, the preview thing turned off, but go to preview portal. Because that will actually take you to a new page with the same portal, but with now the cost analysis preview and some other things. So let's go back here. And if we want to, we've now identified that we can save in this resource group about $10 a month. All right. So that would get me below the $150 limit. So right there, I have now figured out how to not spend money on Azure this month. Well, not this month, because I've already spent most of it, but next month for sure. And if I had done this analysis earlier in the month, I would have been able to save that $10 and come in underneath the limit. Now, again, you're not done. You can go to the next group down and look at the costs here. And again, the lead magnet app service plan, $23.94 a month. Notice we have a service plan for webhooks, and we have one for the lead magnets. Let's go, let it refresh. Sorry. Everything's clickable in the Azure portal, and if you're not careful, you go to the wrong spot, and then it takes a bit for it to remember its brain. Let's refresh here. Let it remember its brain. There we go. So we've got a plan in here and a plan in here, both of which are app service plans. Now, for me particularly, this is actually important because it provides some separation of concerns. I have two very different systems that I use for very different things. So I wanted that separation. But in general, if you have an app service plan, you want to stuff that thing so full that it screams. Use every bit of processing power in that thing. You can put as many websites as you can in there so that you're taking full advantage of the cost you're paying. In my case, I know that I'm not taking full advantage of the cost I'm paying. I have two different app service plans that aren't being utilized to their fullest, and I notice I'm paying so far $23.94 a month for a total of $43 a month each. So I'm paying an additional $43 a month that I don't need to. So eventually I am going to rectify that and get rid of one of them. But I'm not ready to do that yet because I'm doing some transition period. But that's something to keep an eye on. You have two app service plans. Why? Unless this one's maxed out, there's no reason to have a second one. And if it's maxed out, maybe just upgrade this one to a bigger one instead. So that's what I encourage you. So tip number 4 is to review your charges. Look at these charges in the cost analysis. I prefer the cost analysis preview because of how easy it is to see this in a spreadsheet type view. But review these charges. You can actually download this if you want. I believe it downloads a CSV. But review these charges and make sure that you're not double spending on a service or that you are overpaying for a service or something like that. So review these and review the biggest ones first. Get the most bang for your buck. Get the biggest return on your time in your review, all right? There's no reason to spend any time on the ones down here unless you know for sure that you're not actually using it. And then, yeah, it's 17 cents a month, but it's 17 cents that you don't need to spend. So get rid of it. But for the most part, start your analysis at the top. Again, since you use resource groups, it's much easier to understand what the things inside of it are for. If you don't use resource groups well, then you might just have a jumbled mess of Azure services you're afraid to delete because you don't know if they're needed for something else. And that's where you really get into the costs because you're holding on to services that might not be used at all, but you are really afraid to make any changes to them, okay? So use your resource groups to help you organize your services so you know what services are associated with what services. So with that, that is tip number 4, review your charges. Tip number 5, this is one that people don't often understand. So let's go back to the home. Actually, let's go to my desktop instead, or dashboard. So, oh, this is the preview portal, sorry. Let's go back to here and go to dashboard. There we go. So when you have a web app, I think this one's too small. Let's get a peek at it. Yes, we did not upgrade this one, but I do know that I have 2 service plans that do. So let's go to my, my resources and we're gonna look for the webhooks because in the webhooks, I have an app service resource plan. Inside there, I have an API. Okay, this is an actual API we're using. If you are, we're using this API. We'll talk more about it in the future, but this is a real API. So this resource plan, one of the things it has is what's called deployment slots, right down here. And right now, this is our production deployment slot. Well, we can add a slot. And you may say, well, what's a slot? Why would we add a slot? So let's add one. Let's call this one, I don't know, development. Let's keep it all lowercase. All right, and we're going to not clone any of the settings. We could if you want to, but we're not going to for this instance. Notice, let's zoom in here. It says the URL is going to be webhook receiver API -development.azurewebsites.net. Why did it choose that? Well, if you come over here, and if we were to go back and look at this webhook receiver, the URL for webhook receiver is webhook receiver API.azurewebsites.net. So by adding a slot, it adds a dash and a slot name. So dash development. So it's got a full URL that's unique to this particular slot. And hit add. And what this will do is basically create a total duplicate of your website spot. Okay, so our API has certain resources available to it. It has the ability to do certain things like talk to Key Vault and so on. Well, this can do the same thing if you want. Now, I didn't copy any of the data over. But now, if you click on this, it's like it's a whole web app. We can even go to this web app, which should probably time out or say, blank page. Yep, there's a blank page. So why is that helpful? Well, I'm paying for the whole hosting plan for this webhook receiver API. This could be a production app. Let's just pretend it is. So this production web app, well, what if I wanted to have a staging server that was nearly identical to my production settings? Because the closer it is to the production settings, the easier it will be to find bugs before they get to production. Well, you create a slot for that. What if I wanted to have a development server my developers could all work on and try out new things that was as close as possible to production? Well, we just did that right there. So I could deploy my new changes to this slot. Now, I can test it out. Now I have a fully functioning test server without doing hardly any more changes. I would just need to point it to the right databases for development and so on. So now this is a development server. And I can have a staging one. I can have a pre-production one. So with these slots, I can have different stages of my process of deploying my site. And the coolest part is that when you're ready, you can do what's called a slot swap. And what that will do is it will take two of your slots and swap them and make what was the development site, for example, now the production site. And it will change everything over so it's pointing to the production stuff and so on. Basically, your users will never know that they have swapped over to a different place. But you've just basically done a midweek, midday deployment without causing any downtime. So really cool stuff there. We cover that more in the course. But the point here is that you can have a development environment, a staging environment, a testing environment, a QA environment, a pre-production environment, and a production environment for no extra cost and very little extra setup. So you don't have to have a separate website with a separate app service plan and a separate bill in order to get all those things for every website you have. Even cooler, if you wanted to, you could start putting some traffic towards another slot. Maybe you have a an A/B test you're running where you want 5% of your traffic to go to this other site. Well, just put 5% in here, and now notice that 95% will go to the main one, 5% will go to, well, it probably shouldn't go to development, but let's just say it's A/B test version or B version, whatever you want to call it. Well, you can send 5% of your traffic there and see how the test goes, or maybe go all the way to 50. And now you've got a 50-50 split between the two different versions. Try them out, see which one converts better, and then make that one the primary one. So lots of stuff you can do like that with these slots. They can save you a lot of money. There is no reason to have multiple app service plans for one site. You don't need to have a separate development one versus your production one. You can keep them all the same and just have different slots. Each slot is treated as if it's its own site. And yet, so it can have its own permissions, it can have its own connection strings, it can have its own secure key vault connection, everything. But it's all under the same main service. That way, you can have something as close as possible to production and yet be in development mode or staging mode or whatever. And that's a big cost savings, and it's actually even better for your process. So that's tip number 5, is to use those slots for your dev and your staging environments in your production web applications. Now, you do have to have something large enough. Notice that one site I went to, web app I went to, didn't have slots because we weren't paying enough. We were paying for the very, very cheap plan. But for anything production related, this is going to essentially be a free dev environment for your team. So that's another way you can save money in Azure. So just to review the 5 tips I gave you, 1 is to use the pricing calculator to save you money. 2 is to use resource groups to delete everything. The bonus tip number 1 there was also to use that resource group to look at the costs for just that group. And then tip number 3 was to use a budget to put those speed bumps in place so that you are paying attention, or so Azure's paying attention for you to your costs, and that you don't get a surprise at the end of the month. Tip number 4 is to review your charges in your subscription and look at how to do a cost analysis on the most expensive things first. And then tip number 5 is to use those slots for deploying to your dev environment and your staging environment for free. And then bonus tip number 2 was to use Azure Static Web Apps to host websites for basically free. I mean, 1 penny, as we saw, for that website. So those are your 5 tips plus your 2 bonus tips. Let me know down in the comments what other tips you have for saving money in Azure. Now, I hope you've enjoyed these tips. If you want to dig even deeper and learn a lot more about Azure, don't forget to check out my Getting Started with Azure course. Every course purchase goes into supporting more free content like this. Thanks for watching, and as always, I am Tim Corey.